Hey, this is a really quick video. Man, I don't know if it's going to be really quick, but it's an unscripted quick video that I've wanted to make for a very long time, just to get it out there for people who are new to the game or people who have been playing for a long time, what exactly I use to run and prep my games. This isn't the best way to do it, and it's not going to ruin your game to do it a different way. You know, all the YouTube thumbnails. This is just how I do it, and really how I've been doing it just for the last couple months in my in-person D&D game, and I think that's an important detail. So please leave a comment below sharing what are your most used tools, most useful, most used and or most useful tools and resources at your table, whether that's a virtual table or an in-person table, and maybe just mention whether or not it's digital or in-person, because I think that context is important. But here's all the stuff that I've been using, a handful of books, and I did try to organize this pile by most used at the top to least used at the bottom. It's not exactly in order, but let's just get going. Right here is the first set of dice that I ever purchased, technically with some extra D6s there at the bottom. For a long time, my fellow players and I, we all just shared a couple sets of dice that the DM had. And I think I was the first and only other player to buy a set of dice, because I was also really the first and only player from that group who, D&D has become my life. And yes, while I have acquired probably close to a dozen or so sets of dice over the years, I just find that this cheapest set of dice I ever purchased, it has the best contrast, it's the most visible, this gets the job done, and I threw the extra 3d6 in there to create 4d6 for if I'm making characters for D&D, or just I got my nice cool red 3d6 down the line for my old school games, and it's helpful just to have a couple extra d6s for damage and stuff like that. Next, not technically the limited edition Bob World Builder set of dice, I actually just use this bag to hold a couple other strange dice that I have. This D8 is actually a die of weather, and this weather die is actually one that I use very often during my sessions, but I do have a couple other cool ones. Here's one that I've used a handful of times with different traps. Here's one for critical hits. And here's another one that I haven't actually used yet, but I just always have it next to me and forget to use it, but it's obviously supposed to be the attitude of an NPC when the players first run into them. But another item that I've been using a lot at my table recently, you might be able to hear it already, are these really cool coins. These are being used as hero coins or hero points. I made a whole video about that recently up in one of these corners. I definitely recommend checking it out, because that's the reason I've been using these all the time at my table. It's making my game a lot more fun. But maybe one of my most used, my two items here, these are so important to playing D&D, especially running D&D, just taking notes. So literally a pencil and a notebook. This is my notes for Tomb of Annihilation. I think I mentioned that in a couple recent videos. That's the campaign I'm running right now, and I actually only have maybe 5 or 6 pages of notes here, because in previous campaigns I would just make these really long Google Docs with lots of notes and information, and I know that Google Docs is not the best way to be organizing campaign notes as it is, but it's just been way easier doing it all by hand and then really deciding, okay, what's the most important information that I actually need to write down, or I'm gonna forget it. But speaking of other physical props and things, these cool handouts that I made, so these are from the Tomb of Annihilation book. Made a copy on my printer, tore off the edges, stained them with the secret ingredient that I discuss in this video up here, which you can also use to make cool maps. And my players have totally enjoyed these, but even if I wasn't playing an in-person game, I think I'm going to do this kind of thing from now on, because it was a lot of fun just to make something tangible. And of course, being able to hand it to my players was great, but even if I wasn't playing in person, you can show that on your webcam, you could mail it to your players. How cool would that be? I think that would be cool. And yeah, so here's the book itself. This is definitely the most used book that I've been needing to run this campaign, of course. I don't actually love running these big campaign books. Fortunately, Tomb of Annihilation is still one where it's very segmented. It begins in this city, and then there's the wilderness exploration part that's an awesome hex crawl, and then there's the tomb. So you don't have to read it all first. For example, another book that I'm trying to speed run through, because that's the reason I'm doing this. I'm really just trying to finally use all the 5 ebooks I've had forever and never actually played through. And one of the others is Curse of Strahd. And in the beginning of the book, it says, like, read this whole thing before you start your campaign. It just makes it sound so intimidating. And some other handout-like items, I did trace this map to give to my players so they could kind of keep track of things that they're finding along the way, because it did come with a giant fold-out map. I actually have that magneted on the wall in the room we play to a disc plate that's on our wall. And it's just been really cool to have that giant physical representation of Chult, like for this hex crawl portion, and having a magnet on there as a tracker of like where my party's at and the things that they're finding along the way. Now this one's pretty interesting because, and you might have just saw it already, this item is the only thing that I've ever received from a publisher that has truly become something I'm using like during every single session. So this is not a sponsor. This is 120 D100 random tables. I'm still mostly relying on just a couple tables, like mostly items and mostly names, but it has a bunch of tables for both of those things. You know, here's the table of contents, the table of tables, right? To get a sense of all the different things that are offered in this and just packed into this one book. So I always have this at my side, at least for the last, couple months that I've been running the game. I think this is not available on DriveThruRPG. I think it might only be on Amazon, but in either case, I will find it and drop an affiliate link down in the description. So if you want to pick it up, you can support the channel too. One of my most often used books as well has been the Monster Manual, because in Tomb of Annihilation, my party is now in this hex crawl portion, and even though there's a bunch of monsters unique to that book, and they're in the back of that book, a lot of them are coming out of the Monster Manual, and I don't roll them ahead of time. I'm doing them live at the table, so then, if I need to, I'm taking a second to find the monster in here while the party's rolling initiative or kind of like figuring out their positioning or something. And speaking of positioning, grid on one side and blank on the other. Yeah, we're not really doing gridded combat. It's all mostly theater of the mind. But when we get to the point where, okay, we kind of need a visual, I'm just dotting out like, okay, yeah, like this is the room, you guys came in this door, here's the door that the enemies are coming through, and then here's this door where you just like heard that weird sound. Just for in those situations where there's like too much going on at once, it's helpful just to sketch it out on something. And before we get to our last 2 items that I have here, I first want to remind you to give this video a thumbs up if you're finding it useful or entertaining or interesting in any way whatsoever. That kind of thing really does help the channel, especially if you do comment below or share it with a friend or subscribe while you're watching. YouTube sees all that and is like, huh, this is a cool video, and then it shows it to more people. And also, before we get to these last 2 items, there are 2 things, kind of 2 things that I don't have physically, and that is a Google spreadsheet of a D300 table of loot that I created. So I do check that occasionally on my phone, but mostly during prep if I'm just like setting up, okay, here's a chest in this location, but sometimes I'm using that instead of the random book for when my rogues just want to randomly like slash the purse of some drunk tavern goer. Then the other digital item at the table, if you will, is music. We always have some kind of background music going, and it's usually Grace, my wife, being the DJ during our sessions, so that's very helpful. And then finally, the last 2 items are the Dungeon Crawl Classics core rulebook and, of course, the 5th edition core rulebook. We are technically playing D&D 5e, like the characters, or I should say the players, built their characters using this book, but I've only really needed to reference this during prep for some of the monsters that are in the way back, or very recently in a session when I was looking up some spells that a monster had. And this has come into play a number of times because on the occasions where my players have found magic scrolls or magic potions, I'm using stuff from DCC, and most of the times specifically just rolling a random spell from this game, and that's what's on the scroll, or that's the effect of the potion. I mean, I guess one other item that should go with this is index cards, because then I will hand them an index card with the name of that spell and often just write down the page number in here as well, so we can quickly find it later when we need to. But I'm doing that because the spells in DCC are awesome. I should probably make a video about that. But since that video doesn't exist yet, you should just watch this one that's on your screen right now, or consider joining my Patreon, where every month we publish a 5e one-shot adventure or some other 5e homebrew resource to use in your game. But whatever way you're able to support, thank you, and keep building.